hits for the bench. Extra attacker coming on to even things up. To the net, Albertson scores!
The Extra Attackers Podcast with Maude and Jordan.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Extra Attackers Podcast. Maude and Jordan back here once again, checking in for the first time in a week or so. I think it's been a little while since our last episode, but we have some pretty good news to discuss here today. How are you doing, Jordan?
I'm good. How about you, Maude?
Pretty good. As people can obviously see in the background, I'm in a new recording setup in my room. I have the very old Jason Spezza and Daniel Alfredson posters behind me, and then in the little corner there's also a very old Mike Fisher poster that is very beaten up. That is probably almost 20 years old at this point.
Oh my god.
So my childhood bedroom has not changed too much in that location at least, but I got BD1 in the background too, and a couple of albums back there too. So some newer stuff at least, but yeah, slightly different setup for me as the basement studio for Game Over has kind of dissipated.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. An unfortunate nature of that coming to an end, but I mean, at least we still have an avenue to kind of talk about it, especially you. But I mean, you were saying as well, like it's not necessarily a bad thing to not be forced to watch a bunch of Sens games this season.
Yeah,
so
I keep saying that to people.
It's like a blessing in disguise in that sort of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at least I still have extra attackers to talk some hockey, and that's of course what we're going to do today. Starting off with the biggest news, or the most recent news in the NHL, is that Corey Perry has signed with the Edmonton Oilers. I feel like this has been rumored for a while now, like ever since he got cut and it was said that there was a possibility of him returning to the NHL. I feel like everyone was saying Oilers right away. So in the end, I'm not too surprised that it happened, but what about you?
I mean, I think this is just one of the landing points that made the most sense for Perry as soon as he got cleared, obviously, because the Oilers are a team that's definitely trending up, and they look like a team that will probably make noise in the postseason. It seems like they've kind of just gotten rid of that horrifically poor start that they had. They've fixed it up for whatever reason. Things are clicking now. The goalies are playing better. Stuart Skinner has been way better than he was in the first month. He was absolutely unplayable in that first month. And they're going on crazy winning streaks. And I think adding a veteran presence who's been to the final several times before is just a no-brainer if you're the Oilers and if you're not too nervous about what happened with Perry originally. So I think it just kind of makes sense. It's a perfect match for the player and for the team.
Exactly. And I think that if Corey Perry didn't have the weird drama where he got cut from the Blackhawks, the Oilers were probably going to be trying to trade for him at the deadline anyway, and like giving up a draft pick to get him at like 20% retained. So works out awesome for the Oilers that they just get to sign him. I don't think I actually saw what the cap hit was, but yeah, $775 is like league minimum. Corey Perry making the same that Shane Pinto is making this season, which is kind of funny for two very different reasons. A couple of players making way less money than we thought they would heading into the year. But yeah, the Oilers get him for so cheap. It just seems like there's probably no way that this could go wrong unless obviously he did have some issues in Chicago that we don't know the full extent of. But it seems to me that it doesn't seem like such an issue that he couldn't just head, to another locker room where nothing has happened and be okay. It's weird because all the discussion on this has still remained really vague, but it seems that whatever happened with Corey Perry in Chicago was something that was bad enough to get you cut from a team entirely and your contract just ripped up, except not bad enough that you can't just join another team and be fine, which is really interesting. It seems like we won't speculate too much, but it seems like what could possibly happen? It's really weird.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about it, and I don't know if we'll ever know to a full extent until much later. But it makes me kind of think that it was just an incident, I should say, where he might have had a little bit too much to drink and said something kind of like risque, maybe not as kosher as it should have been. And then that might have been seen as a big deal because we do know that it was like at a team event. That was the whole inference. And it was something that happened there. And in his post or his apology, Perry alluded a lot to the fact that it seemed to be alcohol related.
Yeah.
It seems like he's taking steps to mitigate that, and it seems like Gary Bettman's happy with the steps he's taken, so he's allowed to come back in. But if it was really bad, and I would assume that higher ups in league circles know exactly what happened, because otherwise you're not risking this. Like you're not risking signing Corey Perry to blow up in your face because it was so much worse than everyone imagined. That'd be such a nightmare that I'm pretty sure they know what happened on a low level, and they're just kind of like it. It wasn't bad enough to really make us scared that it could happen again, or he's showing real commitment to turning over a new leaf in that regard. So it's hard to say, but it seems like it couldn't have been as severe as some people were speculating.
Yeah, you mentioned like alcohol, and Perry had a press conference today with Ken Holland, and he said something kind of similar. He alluded to that. This is from Zach Lang on Twitter. He was saying that Perry was asked about getting help for mental health and substance abuse issues and what advice he would give to other people in that situation. And he said, I quote, "This situation is not easy, but if you do have a problem, get help, seek help. There's no shame in it. If you need the help, go find it and treat yourself. When I get up in the morning every day now, I can look myself in the mirror and be happy about myself and where I'm going and be proud of what I've done over the last few months." So to me, it sounds like it definitely is some sort of mental health, substance abuse thing with how he answered that question. So obviously glad to hear that he's doing better. I do find it a little weird though that this whole thing resulted in him having his contract terminated instead of just going into the player assistance program, because we've seen a lot of players go into that program recently. Like I know Sam Girard went in for like a month and then he's already out and he's playing well again lately. So that program is there to help people, but it's interesting that Corey Perry didn't end up in that program and he just got cut from his team.
That is a little strange. That's a good point because we've seen players enter the program before without being cut from teams. So I don't know, maybe whatever happened originally affected it. Like they kept saying it affected a team employee.
That's right.
So maybe it was something he said, maybe, or like maybe he took a pass at someone where like he was drunk and it wasn't like reciprocated, or it was over the top, and that person may not feel comfortable with Perry being in the environment even after the steps he's taken. It could be some sort of HR thing like that where they just needed a clean break. But it's really hard because all you're really doing is speculating off of conjecture and things that people say, oh yeah, I think I heard this, or this is the rumor. So it could be what we're thinking now, where it wasn't as bad as initially expected because he was able to come back into the league really quickly, signed this deal only like a month or two after this happened. So it's like a very quick turnaround if it was something small, but at the same time, why would he get cut from the Blackhawks? And that's the thing. That's kind of why I usually support transparency in incidents like this, because then you kind of know what the NHL is responding to, what their decision is based off of what happened, and whether that's justified or not. Because at this point, we're just kind of guessing, which I get it protects potentially the victim that's at play here. But I think you could detail the situation without naming the person. And I think it would go a long way to kind of establish the precedent for what happens when something similar happens again. Because this is really weird to have someone just cut from a team, come back later, go into the program where players usually go in without being cut. So it's a really weird situation to wrap your head around that I think could be made much more clear if they actually just told us or gave us some context.
Yeah, it's so strange, and I can't get too much into it, but I did hear like a sort of a secondhand rumor from a fairly reliable source that it might have had something to do with, obviously it was like a team event sort of thing, and it may have had something to do with like team sponsors and like executives that were there. With regardless of whatever happened, it could be a sort of a thing where like those type of people were offended, and maybe they had a bit of a stance of like, you can't have this guy on your team, like why do you employ this guy, sort of thing, like get him out of here type of thing with whatever happened. But that's as far as I can speculate about that. It could be something bigger than what any of us know in terms of just like who was involved and got their feelings hurt in the situation, which is tough. But whatever it was, Ken Holland did also say that he spoke to Kyle Davidson about this whole thing to see, I guess, probably the severity of the issue and I guess how the Blackhawks feel after officially parting ways with Corey Perry. And it seems that they really did their due diligence before bringing him to the Oilers, and they definitely weren't deterred by anything that they heard from Kyle Davidson. So it does make me wonder if Kyle Davidson as well, maybe he didn't really want to cut Corey Perry, but maybe he had to, or there was pressure from other individuals.
That would make sense. And it seems like, of course, with these big sports organizations, it's the financials that is the real killer. Like, you affect the money bag, then that's going to bring you the real punishment. So maybe even then it wasn't actually that big of a deal. It just struck a chord with the wrong people. So again, very, very speculative to what happened, but I don't really distrust the Oilers in any way. I don't think they would try to hide anything under the rug that was too massive. So he probably deserves to be there. He's probably paid his dues by going through the program. And I mean, he had 9 points in 16 games as a Blackhawk. Granted,
on that team, that's really impressive.
That is impressive. I mean, he might have been getting help from Bedard, but I don't remember which line he was playing on and things like that. But that's still a good start. So maybe he could be beneficial in a depth role for Edmonton. I guess we'll have to see. Man,
Corey Perry's 9 points in 16 games is still like top 10 on the Blackhawks, which is
crazy.
Like Boris Kachuk, Kevin Korchinski, and Lucas Reichel, they all also have 9 points, but they have played like more than double or triple the games that Corey Perry did. And then you have Taylor Radish and Alex Vlasic are only 1 point ahead of Corey Perry, again with like 40 games played. And then like fifth on their team in scoring is 14 points in 42 games. So I'm sure the Blackhawks would have loved if this whole thing didn't happen and they still had Corey Perry on their team. He probably would be top 5 in scoring on their team, judging by how he was doing at the beginning of the year. But hey, Edmonton cleans up and gets themselves a nice little veteran player for a playoff run for absolutely free, other than league minimum salary for the rest of the year, which is pretty awesome for them, because even though the Oilers have been on like an amazing hot streak the last 2 months, they do sort of have some kind of questionable players in the bottom of their lineup that I'm sure they would love to have some better veterans in there instead. Like Connor Brown has 0 goals in 35 games, and yet you just got to keep playing him type of thing. They've been playing Adam Ernie, they've been playing Sam Gagner, and no disrespect to those players, but probably guys that you would want to have sort of like as your healthy scratch type forwards and not necessarily playing on the fourth line every game.
I mean, although those players would be in Chicago's top 6.
They would. That's
are
true.
They that
That's
bad?
So maybe they're on par with Corey Perry as well. But I think it's free depth, and it's going to be great for them. I loved watching Corey Perry just being a complete pest for Dallas and Tampa those last few years, and even for Montreal. I remember, I think he scored in Game 7 against the Leafs for Montreal in the COVID year, and I was just like, yes, Corey Perry, I love you in this moment. So I'm excited to see him on a playoff run with the Oilers. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, that was an all-time moment. That's probably one of my favorite series to watch ever. It was hilarious. And there was a documentary about it, which made it even better.
That's a good one to just go back and watch the highlights of those last 3 games every now and then.
Exactly.
And the documentary was so funny, too, because they kind of just cut it off after they lost Game 7. It was just like Will Arnett in the commentary just being like, oh, and yeah, so then we lost. That sucks. And then the documentary just ends in like 2 minutes after that. They're just like, all right, wrap it up, guys. Go home.
We're done, guys.
Go home.
You've done enough. Honestly, I was kind of disappointed when I watched it, because I was like, I know, like I'm just watching to see the suffering to some extent, but I thought it would be more interesting to see all the players' reactions and the coaches' reactions after that series, because it was such a monumental collapse, and they just never really went into it. And I was like, I guess like Leafs fans won't care as much because they're just like, well, this is just painful. But I would have been interested as a hockey fan to see what it would have looked like in the room after that. But,
yeah, I have to think that the team just said to the Amazon cameraman, they were just like, nah, you can't come in the locker room after that. They were like, nah, you're done. You've got enough footage, and we don't want to show any more of what's happening. That it had to be something like that.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Well, we're going to actually get more into the Leafs later as to how they're currently doing. But before we get into that, we actually have to talk about the New York Islanders because they are the latest team to make a coaching change. And I have to say, this one kind of surprised me at the first time I heard it because they're only 2 points outside of the playoffs. Now, obviously, they have a bunch of loser points, but it seemed to me that like they could still easily turn it around and get into the playoffs. But they still made the decision to let go of Lane Lambert and bring in Patrick Waugh, which was kind of a surprising decision to me as well because I don't know what type of strategy he's going to be using, if he's going to try to get the Islanders back to their defensive glory of just shutting teams down. But, he's been looking at getting back into the NHL for a while now. He was kind of rumored as being a possible future coach for the Sens, but he ends up going to the Islanders. And I don't know, when I looked more into the Islanders' stats this season, I can see why they decided to make the change. But before we get into that, let me know, were you surprised to see Patrick Waugh take over?
I honestly, yeah, I was kind of surprised. Like, I knew that he had left, or Roy had left the Ramparts this offseason after another successful season with them, and he was looking to get back into coaching. I thought there was a lot of noise around the Ottawa job, and he has interviewed for it before. Granted, it's been a long time. That was back when DJ Smith was initially hired, but I thought maybe there's a chance, and he's kind of the makeup for the coach I wanted in Ottawa, someone who's very much into accountability, about being hard on the players and about pushing for the result you want instead of being more lackadaisical, like more of a hands-on approach from him. And I didn't really think that the Islanders would be looking into that sort of thing. But granted, like I heard a lot of I don't know why I keep saying Oilers, a lot of Islanders fans continuously call for Lane Lambert's head.
Yeah.
I saw that a lot. And even though their record wasn't really that bad, I saw it so much that I knew that it had to be beyond their record to a certain extent. And honestly, I do like the hire for them. I really was intrigued by Patrick Waugh as a coach. And like I said, I wanted him in Ottawa. I thought he was perfect to change up the dynamic that we were having here. And I think he's a good coach for them. It kind of brings along, though, the typical John Tortorella question of like, how long are you going to last coaching that style?
He didn't last very long the first time around with Colorado.
Exactly.
After one good year. So it'll be a question to see if he can last longer than like 2 to 3 years this time.
Exactly. And it seems to be like a trend with those extremely hard on the players types of coaches like Torts and things like that, where eventually their shelf life just starts to expire. Their message isn't as internalized as it was before. So you wonder if that's going to happen again, or if he's going to be able to like squeeze some good seasons out of this Islanders team. Because honestly, I don't love how the Islanders are built. If I was an Islanders fan, I'd have a lot of questions about Lou Lamoriello and what his future should be, because he's made a lot of strange decisions. But I do think Ra's a good coach to kind of elevate what they already have as a John Tortorella type. So I'm intrigued. I think it is a good decision overall, but I'm mostly excited for the chaos, admittedly.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if he's like screaming at the opposition coaches and like banging down the glass again like he was 10 years ago. But yeah, you're right about Lou Lamoriello, where there's definitely questions to be had about his roster construction and the current team. But I don't think we can question him in this decision when we look deep into the Islanders' stats, because Lane Lambert, with the way this team was playing, just wasn't cutting it. It seemed like a little bit of a short leash to me, considering they did make the playoffs last year. And to be honest, I kind of forgot that they made the playoffs last year. I thought they missed
too.
But I think they got taken out by Carolina in like 5 or 6 games in the first round. But like Lane Lambert made the playoffs once, but then they're not currently in a playoff spot. So obviously the expectation was to make it in again. And even though they're close, the loser points, the reality of their record is that it's 20 wins and 26 losses. It's just that 11 of those losses are extra time, so they get the 1 point each for all of those 11. But only winning 20 of your first 46 games. Obviously not looking great for playoff aspirations. Even if you get in because of those loser points, you're clearly not performing up to standards. And even though I think the Islanders roster isn't that good at this point, they have been a roster for the last 5 years that's always punching above its weight. So at the point that they aren't doing that anymore, you have to try to change things up a bit. So I think it made sense to make the coaching change. And I did a lot of digging on their stats, as I've said already. I'm going to get into these here. I think some of them are very surprising and very funny. And the first two really funny ones, for a very specific reason, are that they have the third least regulation wins in the Eastern Conference, the same number of regulation wins as the Ottawa Senators, which is funny to me. So rough. They're getting all of those overtime losses, and they're also having a lot of overtime wins too. So they're not winning in regulation frequently. Just a lot of overtime games, and they can't finish things out in regulation. So having the same number of regulation wins as the Sens is obviously not great. Another thing that is actually worse than the Sens, they have the fourth worst goal differential in the East.
Really?
Which surprised me. I know that they don't score a lot, but I didn't think it was going to be that bad. They're minus 20 in goal differential, which is crazy considering they're only 2 points outside of the playoffs, and considering all of the overtime losses. Every overtime loss is only a minus 1 goal differential, right? Because you were close. You were tied and got to overtime. So that means they've had most of their regulation losses. They've been getting like blown the fuck out at that point, right?
No, that's crazy. I didn't expect it to be worse than the Sens, to be honest, because the Sens have lost some terrible high scoring games. Although, granted, I guess they usually make it like closer in the last 5 minutes or a couple times.
Yeah, sometimes
they'll score like 2 times or something, so that it doesn't look as embarrassing as it did before. But that's a crazy stat. Like, I know the Islanders aren't an offensive powerhouse, and truthfully, they probably want some more higher end offensive players if they ever want to truly compete, but that's still a pretty embarrassing stat line for a team with Noah Dobson going off, Bo Horvat and Matthew Barzal all being there as well. Like that seems like a bad stat if you're the coach there.
Exactly, because with the players you mentioned performing really well this year, Barzal is on pace for like his best season since his rookie year. Horvat is doing just as good as he always does, and Noah Dobson having the breakout year. In my mind, without looking at the stats, I thought that, their offense is doing much better this year. So yeah, they don't have the defensive commitment, but they're scoring way more goals. But they're still minus 20 goal differential. So those guys alone can't carry them to even being even in goal difference. So they're, regardless of the coaching change, I feel like they might need to add some forwards to get some more scoring in there, because obviously they're going to want to shore up the defensive play, which has slipped from when it used to be so good. But like the minus 20 is pretty brutal.
That's insane.
Coinciding with the really bad goal differential is the total goals against ranks third worst in the Eastern Conference. So pretty similar stat. Those go hand in hand there. So like, even though they are scoring a little bit more, the total goals against is brutal. And it also shows in the way they play, not just the goals allowed, but it's like you can't really blame the goalies, because second worst shots against in the entire league. And they also don't get that many shots for either. I didn't rank all the differentials, but their differential was really bad, and the total like shots against, or the average shots against per game, was only better than the San Jose Sharks. So if you look at Ilya Sorokin's stats this year and you say they don't look that good anymore, like, I thought this guy was supposed to be one of the best goalies, it's not his fault when you see stats like that. I remember seeing a lot of games, like when I match up against him in fantasy, he will allow like 4 or 5 goals and still have like almost a 900 save percentage, right? So I feel bad for him, and it's very shocking to me to see the Islanders allowing that many shots from how they've played over the last 5 years.
Yeah, that hasn't really been their style. Like, they've always been marketed as like this very defensively responsible team where they'll beat you 2-1, 3-2 every game. And that's kind of how they make their progress. But honestly, like, just hearing all the stats, and especially knowing like their differential, they're all their overtime losses, I should say, it really seems like Sorokin and the other high-end offensive pieces really carried them to all those OTL losses.
Hmm.
Like those players are the only reason there to begin with. So even though the record on paper doesn't look as bad as it could, I could very much understand Islanders fans wanting Lambert fired because you shouldn't find yourself in this predicament with those offensive players doing as well as they have. Um,
Exactly.
Especially with a team that's built. Frankly, I think they're built for defensive
Hmm.
responsibility.
They still
That's
are.
yeah. That's why freaking Lumreno will give like 7 year, $3 million contract to Pierre Engvall,
Yeah.
just because
And
of
I
his
think he
two-way
I think he
game.
gave 7 years to like Scott Mayfield too.
Oh yeah, no,
Locking up
that's
those
crazy
defensive D
too.
and two-way forwards. And another thing that it should be the Islanders' bread and butter is the penalty kill. I'll put it this way. Last year, they had the ninth best penalty kill, and that was still under Lane Lambert, so that wasn't even Barry Trotz. They still had a pretty good one under Lane Lambert. But then, the year before that, under Barry Trotz, fourth best penalty kill, and the year before that, sixth best. So for 3 straight years, they've been always top 10 in penalty kill. This year, fifth worst. How does that happen? Even
That shouldn't.
I could
shouldn't.
understand if it fell off immediately under Lane Lambert, but it was still top 10 last year. So, like, what? How? That kind of stuff baffles me year to year with special teams. Like, for example, the Sens power play being so garbage this year compared to how good it was last year with basically the exact same players. This is a similar thing to me here, especially because I know that, what's his name? I can't remember his name. It's this Swedish guy. I think it's Holmstrom. He has like a bunch of shorthanded goals for the Islanders. So they're scoring shorthanded goals, but they're not stopping the power play goals from going in against them, which is another thing that you think should be their strength on this team.
It should be. Again, it's what this team has been built for, and if they're fundamentally failing at that, I think you have to question the coaching, which is probably why this move got made. And like you said, I honestly don't think there's any sort of large roster turnover between last season and this season.
Mm-hmm.
And you still should have Pajot somewhere in that lineup, and he was a very good penalty killer
Yeah,
when
he's
he was
still
on the
out there.
Sens.
Still out there on the PK. I've seen
So
him like assisting on all of those shorthanded goals.
yeah, so clearly he's there. Clearly he's a part of it. He's impactful. So yeah, like that can't happen. Getting progressively worse from ninth and then to fifth last, like
Mm-hmm.
that's more than just a personnel issue. That's a structural issue.
Exactly.
So I'm not surprised.
And then the last stat that I noticed being really bad was they have the fifth least amount of road wins in the Eastern Conference. There are a couple of teams that are way worse on the road, which is the Sens and the Blue Jackets, my choice of amazing teams that I follow. But
So lucky.
the Islanders don't win on the road, and they are at least decent on home ice. Like most of their wins are on home ice, and even a good chunk of those OTLs are on home ice. But on the road, they're just getting like regulation loss. So that's another thing that they got to pick up there. And yeah, in terms of like the player stats, the only person that I really see like underperforming on their team, I feel like in terms of individual stats, is Anders Lee. Not really up to that like 30-35 goal pace that we're used to seeing from him. So I feel like it's just a structural issue on this team, which I didn't expect to be happening.
No, me neither. And they're in such a weird place. Like they don't seem to want to rebuild. They've been getting assets. Like they traded for Horvat last year. Um, and I get they're trying to augment their team to be more competitive, but part of me just wonders like if you're gonna have to just pull the rug out from under it soon. Like if you're just gonna have to
Oh,
start to
you think, eh?
sell. I mean, it's hard because I mean, at least from my perspective, you don't want to settle into the area of mediocrity where you're like making the playoffs wild card every year, but then losing the first round
Mm-hmm.
because there's really no good way to move up from that. Like you can hope that you get lucky in free agency, maybe, or like you have a draft pick that you go in like the mid first round and it happens to be way better than it's supposed to be. Um, but that stuff is rare. You have to get lucky for those things to happen a lot of the time. So I find rebuilding and knowing like when to rebuild is very important in today's NHL. And a lot of teams wait too long and just get comfortable where they are. And sometimes a retool can work, but you never just want to be in the murky middle because you're not getting anything from that. You're not getting a high draft pick and you're not getting a great amount of playoff experience. So I don't think like this is a question that they really have to consider now, but with how a lot of the players in that core, like Josh Bailey already left, Anders Lee is getting worse. Barzell is still a great player in his prime, but Horvat is getting older. And is this the sort of production we're going to have to expect from year in, year out? I don't know if that's necessarily true. Dobson's a great piece on defense, but everyone else got older. An older player like Nick Leddy isn't even there anymore, and he used to be like one of their top defenders. So they're kind of in this like weird middle ground of roster turnover between remaining the same and trying to augment that. So I don't really know where it's going to go. Like, is it going to jump off into being more productive than you would think with someone like Watt, or are they going to have to ask themselves more tough questions, maybe even as soon as this offseason? I don't know, but I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
I'm very curious to see if they end up buying at the trade deadline, because I do think you could easily add a couple of offensive pieces and get the current group of defensemen and forwards playing a better brand of defensive hockey back to like how they used to be, and just add some scoring, and you could easily like go on a good playoff run this year if you sneak into a wildcard spot. But you are right that this team is pretty old. Lee is 33, Nelson is 32, Pajot 31, Palmieri 32. They're staples in the bottom six. Martin is 34, Clutterbuck is 36. Like, how much longer do you have left with these guys being in their prime, you know? And the defense is a little more younger or prime aged, which is good. Varlamov is getting up there in age too, but they still have him signed for another 3 years, so hopefully he can keep it up. Casey Cizikas is even 32 as well. I forgot that he had been around that long. So it's a bunch of guys where it's like, how many years do they have left in them? I think Lou is going to be trying to add to this team and try to get them to go on a couple more deep playoff runs with this core. But you're right that it's tough because they don't have a lot of good young prospects coming up because they haven't had any high draft picks in the last few years because they've been kind of a staple in the playoffs. So, like, when I look at who's coming up, it's a bunch of names that I, for the most part, don't know, or at least I do know them, and I know that they weren't a very high draft pick. So it's not like they have anyone coming in to just save the day. And the thing is, as well, you have Sorokin as one of the best goalies that you just signed to an 8-year extension. So do you start a rebuild right after that contract kicks in? Or and also Barzell's new contract just started this year, and you have Horvat with an extension. So I feel like you would want to keep trying to win with those guys, but it's the supporting cast around them and a bit of the leadership group that's getting old, so they might not have much time left, which makes it tough.
But yeah, like with all those players that you mentioned being in their 30s, those are the players that I think of when I think of the Islanders to some extent, because those were the character guys that have been on the team for so long. And honestly, I feel like at this point, Lou just kind of has to go for it. I don't think he gets the grace of another attempt at starting from the ground up. And they've had some like questionable drafting choices besides Dobson. They of course got, I forget his name, but he was supposed to be a sniper in the Kachuk draft.
Wallstrom,
that's it.
I remember people wanting Wallstrom instead of Kachuk, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, that would have been a bad call.
Was Dobson the same draft? Because I also remember people wanting Dobson.
He might have.
Did they have two? I think they had two picks. They picked both of them. Dobson would have been a good pick for us, but
a very good pick.
Wallstrom over Kachuk, ain't no way.
No. And he's kind of fallen off and hasn't really found his footing in the NHL yet, and that's a big loss because I think he was a top 10 pick as well, or just outside, like 11 or something. So they kind of have to go for it here. Lou has already used up his chance, and I guess we'll see what he does. I think he'll definitely buy, but it's going to be an interesting couple months for the Islanders to see if they actually substantially improve or they just set themselves in the ways that we've seen. They're going to be an interesting team to track for sure.
Exactly. And before we go, we might as well talk about Lou Lamoriello's old team. It's really hard to say Lou Lamoriello. Clearly.
It is. That's why I'm just saying Lou.
I keep slipping on it. So Lou's old team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, who, hey, they won last night as of the time of recording against the Seattle Kraken, but they have had a rough last 2 weeks. a lot of losses, a lot of blown leads. They beat Calgary and Seattle in the last 6 games, but I think those are the only 2 wins in the last 6 games, if I remember correctly. And last episode we did the look back at our standings predictions, and I remember that I was saying the Leafs would probably be first in the division, and you were saying no, you could maybe see them having a bad season. And as it stands right now, just over the halfway mark of the year, they're only 1 point ahead of each of Detroit and Tampa Bay. With they do have 1 and 2 games in hand on each of those teams, but with the way they've been playing lately, who knows if they'll even win those games in hand. I didn't think that we were going to be in a situation where the Leafs might not make the playoffs or they'll only barely get in, but that's where we're at right now, despite Austin Matthews being on a 70-goal pace, which is really funny to me that he's doing so
Ridiculous.
good, and it doesn't even really help them in the standings.
No, Toronto is so weird. Like I said that I could foresee like a bad season, but nothing like this. I was thinking like they shore up like the 3rd spot in their division or something like that. Not they have a legitimate chance at missing if other teams continue to trend better than them at this point forward. Like if the Leafs go 500 from this point, they stand a serious shot of missing the playoffs with those other teams right on their heels. And we were expecting this division to be more competitive, not in the same way.
Yeah, not in the way that we thought it was going to be, but it still is to some degree.
Exactly. So, but it's been weird. Like when initially I didn't think the Leafs were going to do that well. Like admittedly, I think that this is probably the worst roster they've put together in the last like even 5 years.
You're probably right.
Like, of course, they have the high-end talent, which is very good on that team, and it carries them through a lot of games. But a lot of their depth pieces are just not it. Like, Giordano's been really struggling. I mean, he's the oldest active player in the NHL, so that kind of makes sense. The Klingberg deal was an absolute nightmare. Where he's on Robodot Island now, I guess.
Yeah, he's just done. We are never going to see him again.
Never again. TJ Brody has been brutal from what I've seen, and he's usually one of the more consistent top 4 defensemen. It really seems like there's been issues on forward and defense. Granted, like I know Joseph Wool has been injured, which hurts you a lot because he was your main starter. But even then, he's a rookie goaltender, so you're expecting a lot out of him, essentially for him to carry your team goaltending wise when he comes back, because Martin Jones has been very hit and miss, and Samsonov has been frankly unplayable. I think he got the win last night though.
He did. Yeah.
So maybe he's on an upwards trend, but there's been a lot of things going wrong for this team, and I think they've honestly thrown a lot of money towards the wrong areas. Yeah, like even a player like William Nylander, who I think has been fantastic this season and deserved the extension he got, that drives up Marner's price, and it's the same thing where they're investing a lot of money into high-end talent on their team while not addressing defense and their bottom 6, and that's been a nightmare for them. Like they've been throwing so many different line combos out there. They've been trying Pontus Holmberg on the top left wing position. They've been so desperate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can this not work with the amount you're spending on those upper echelon players? That's the thing that like bewilders me.
Yeah, dude, Pontus Holmberg, it's really funny to me seeing him out there because maybe this is just the way my brain works, but he wears number 29 and he's a left-handed shot. And whenever I see him skating out there, I'm like, oh, it's Leon Draisaitl. Oh, wait, this is the Leafs. And he just looks like a fake-ass Leon Draisaitl out there, and I think it's really funny. I don't know why. It's just like, you should have picked a different jersey number there, guy. Because you look, the way he skates, he looks like Leon Draisaitl, but it's like, oh, we have Leon Draisaitl at home.
See, is he giving you nightmares? You're just like, oh my god, I dreamt Leon Draisaitl was a Leaf.
Oh my god, yeah, literally. It's okay. The Leafs won't have any damn cap space to sign Draisaitl when he's a UFA, so
that's
we
true.
don't need to worry about that, because yeah, the high cap hits, they have to pray that John Tavares takes a pay cut when his contract is up. which, you know what, it will be honestly fair to get him signed at a pay cut because he has 0 points in the last 7 games, and I'm really mad about it because I have him in fantasy on one of my teams. I want to trade him away. I was like, oh, we have some Leafs fans in this league, maybe I can trade him to them. But then I look at the rosters and I'm like, why would they trade anyone good for Tavares right now? Like, I would feel dumb offering him to anyone because he's doing so bad right now. So they're going to need him to take a pay cut and also step up his game a little bit, because if this is indicative of how he's going to play in the future, that's not good for them with how poor their depth is. You don't exactly have a young center who can move up and take his role in the top 6, unless Matthew Nyes can somehow play center in the future, but I don't think he's ever played center before. He's always been a winger. You don't want to be putting Max Domi in their top 6 or anything like that. So they better hope they can get him at a pay cut. But, man, I have to say, the Leafs defense is really funny to me right now when I look at it. It's so bad on paper. Like, they have some games where they perform well and they have games where they perform worse. So it's not as bad as it looks on paper, but on paper it looks so freaking bad, especially because like 2 years ago, I think even in the playoff run last year, they're like, oh, we have so many defensemen, we're loaded. We have 8, 9 NHL defensemen. Man, we have Connor Timmins, and we don't even need to play him. We healthy scratch him, and he's so good. And now they see him play, and they're like, yeah, he sucks, get rid of him. And last year, like, they got rid of Rasmus Sandin because they're like, oh, we don't even have room to play him. And, like, he hasn't been great in Washington, so maybe it doesn't matter that they didn't keep him, but I just think it's funny that it looked like Dubas had built such a good defense depth, at least after last year's trade deadline, and now their defense depth just looks freaking garbage. With as soon as John Klingberg is injured, and even if John Klingberg wasn't injured, I don't think he'd be helping very much. Like,
no, not at all.
And like you don't have Jake Muzzin either, but he's been like done for over 2 years now at this point, so you wouldn't have expected him to return. But basically, you have Morgan Rielly signed long-term. Then TJ Brody is the next highest-paid defenseman. He is an expiring UFA, and as you said, he has been playing poorly lately. So would they even want to bring him back? Maybe bring him back at a pay cut and play him like on the third pair, but you're going to have to replace him. At least with his $5 million cap hit, you can probably find a good defenseman, although they did pay Klingberg almost $5 million, so who knows about Brad Treliving's judgment on finding new defensemen. But that's your second highest paid D, and then you have Jake McCabe signed for another year at $2 million, which is pretty good. He's underpaid. But then you have Timothy Liljegren, who's going to be an RFA, and I've heard that he's not doing as well as he was last year and at the start of this year. I think he had an injury and he slowed down a bit after that. But that's your top 4, which is already not good. And then you have Connor Timmins, who is a fringe player. You have Giordano, who's the oldest player in the league, and he's probably going to be done after this year, I would assume. Yeah. And then you have Simone Benoit, who couldn't hack it on the Ducks. The Ducks just let him go to UFA, even though he was of RFA age. He's going to be an RFA after this year. And then William Lagesson, who couldn't hack it for the Oilers or the Habs. So what the hell is this decor that Brad Treliving assembled? He's going to have to step up his game, like both at the trade deadline and in the offseason, because you're going to need to add to this team at the deadline if you want to have any hope of winning a playoff series. And then some of these guys you're going to be wanting to just let go in the offseason and get new defensemen in there. And although, to be honest, talking about the trade deadline, I don't know if they even should add at the deadline. Maybe they should just say, this year is not our year. We're going to load up for next year and just don't even really buy at the deadline, especially because all they have for picks is like late round picks and their first this year. They already lost their first for next year, and they have no second round picks for the next 3 years. So what the hell are you going to trade other than your current first round pick? And they probably might want to keep it.
They shouldn't do that. Like, behind Nyes, I can't think of their next best prospect. Roby Hirvinen, maybe?
You know what? I looked at him the other day because I was like, oh, what's that guy up to? They were hyping him up like crazy, and he's only played 2 games all year because he got injured really badly. So even he's like as one of their best prospects, he's not even playing. So he's going to have a setback in his development.
Oh, yeah. No, that'll be a big part of it. And I mean, it's really sad, but what happened with Rodin Amirov, I think he was a first-round pick
true.
Too.
Yeah, that was tragic.
So that's absolutely tragic. And of course that extends to beyond hockey. But like, they don't have a lot of draft capital. They don't have a lot of prospects. I would err on keeping the first, especially because if you happen to either add and miss the playoffs or lose in the first round, you're giving up a pick that will be from like 10 to 20, so somewhere in that range.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you have to be very careful. But like the other thing is too, like how you can't take on money at this point in time, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
even next season, Tavares I think will definitely take a pay cut when he's done, but he's still going to be making 11 million next season.
Exactly. So they need
Marner,
him to step it up while he's still making that money. Otherwise,
exactly.
it's a huge waste of space until his next contract.
It's absolutely huge. And next year, Marner's on the last year of his deal. So after next year, any money that you save from a down payment on Tavares, maybe that goes right to Marner.
Probably, and it goes to Nylander already. Like
It goes to Nylander already.
before you even take the pay cut on Tavares, you're already giving Nylander the huge raise.
Exactly. And also think about the fact that the Leafs are at the cap. They're also at the cap while using, I think, Jake Muzzin and Matt Murray's LTIR.
Exactly, they're already over
And
just because of those.
exactly. And I think Matt Murray's contract ends after this season. And maybe Muzzin's does too.
They both do.
They both do. So immediately you lose about 10 million in LTIR cushion right there. And that goes
who is
straight to your cap.
who is never playing again so that they can trade for him. We gotta start looking at the list of whose career is just over when they have multiple years left on their deal, because those are the Leafs trade targets. That's who they're going to be looking
They'll be
for.
candidates. Exactly. Because when you think about it, with the money they've already given to Nylander, it was about like a $4 million bump up from his previous contract.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rumored rise in cap for this offseason, about
Yeah.
$4 million. They've already given away the money into that. The $5 million they get from Brody might just go into paying for the contracts that are currently being paid for by Muzzin and by Matt Murray. Like, where's the money going to come from for a good, reliable defenders or a good and reliable bottom six?
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to see. And honestly, like I thought that firing Kyle Dubas, even with how it's been kind of shaky in Pittsburgh for him so far, was the wrong decision in terms of what really needed to be addressed was someone from the core needed to be traded.
I think if they kept Kyle Dubas, he would have tried to switch it up by now. Because he's
agree.
smart. He's not dumb enough to just keep going with that same thing forever, whereas Brad Treliving comes in and Brendan Shanahan wants him to just... that's the thing, is Brendan Shanahan is in the way. Brendan Shanahan doesn't want to break up the core four, which is probably why Kyle Dubas got the sack.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, I mean, at this point, I don't see how you can't. Like, I don't see how you keep running it back over and over and have the same type of failure. And like, I know they got Treliving because he's an experienced GM, but even look at the state of Calgary. What you can kind of see happening to the Leafs is looking very similar to what's happening in Calgary, where they thought, hey, we can go for it. We're really like Calgary was a little bit different situation where they had to trade star players, but it was augmenting a new lineup around new stars like Kadri, like Huberdeau. It didn't go well. And now he's trying to augment a new lineup around new stars. It failed before. I thought it was a weird hire. I didn't really support it. I thought going after like an assistant from Tampa or even Carolina would have made a lot more sense, just to get a new voice in the room, a new perspective. But I think honestly, Brendan Shanahan likes his yes men, and I think that's a big contributing factor here.
Yeah, it seems to me that Dubas probably wanted to deviate from his previous plans and switch it up a little bit, and Shanny said no, so he gave Dubas the boot and then brought in a new guy to just do his bidding for him.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to watch the Leafs for the rest of the season. See if they can miss the playoffs. That would be awesome. That would make me very happy, especially because the Sens are absolutely screwed. So at least if the Leafs could get dragged down with us, that would be awesome. Give me a little bit of Schadenfreude or however they say it. Interesting as well. The Leafs they have 2 more games before the All-Star break, and they're both against Winnipeg. It's a home and home, and Winnipeg, of course, sitting first in the entire NHL right now. So I know the Leafs usually like kind of phone it in against bad teams, but then they step up their game against the better teams. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they do in that 2-game set against the Jets, especially if Mark Scheifele comes back from injury for those games.
That's true.
Because that'll be a big boost for the Jets, and they have Kyle Connor back too. So I'm really excited for those 2 games. And who knows, maybe in our next episode we'll return after those 2 games and break down how it all went.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a new perspective then. I do want to say though, I guess adding the win to Seattle because I think Seattle's in a playoff spot since
They're just outside, but
they're
they've
just
been
outside.
hot. They've been hot lately because they were not close, and now they've
Okay.
gotten close.
I thought with how hot they were, they might have just gotten in, but considering the game yesterday that the Leafs won, since I think it's either December 6th or 12th, the Maple Leafs have beaten one team in a playoff spot.
Yeah, you
Every
know
other
what?
win
That's
has
right.
come against a bottom team.
And who was the team that they even beat in the playoffs?
Oh, I
I'm
don't
double checking.
remember.
I'm like,
I'm trying to.
oh, it was the Kings. It was the Kings.
The Kings
Which-
are going through their own thing right now,
Which is funny
so-
because the Kings are like two. I think I was looking earlier and they were like 2-5-3 in the last 10, which is terrible. And they're now playing David Riddick as their starting goalie.
Oh, God.
Because Cam Talbot decided to stop being good again. But yeah, it's so funny because even the Leafs' best stretch over the last month was that California road trip where they shut out the Kings, yeah, but the Kings are sucking lately. They barely beat the Ducks, and then they beat the Sharks twice, because then the Sharks came to Toronto after. So it's like, ooh, you beat up on the Sharks, good for you. And
possibly
oh,
like the worst team in the last decade.
exactly. So like, I'm looking at their calendar schedule right now, and like, if you go back to their 7-0 win against Pittsburgh, on December 16th. That was their last like really good win. This is how it goes. 5-2 loss to the Rangers, 9-3 loss to Buffalo, and then okay, you beat the Blue Jackets, but they're horrible. Then you somehow lose to the Sens. Then you lose to the Blue Jackets for the second time in 2 weeks, because just 2 weeks earlier they lost to them. So you lose to them again, then you lose to Carolina. Then they get that California run where it's like, okay, you beat some crappy teams. And then you get to the current stretch where they have 2 wins in the last like 7 games, I believe it is. I think they're 2-4-1 or something. Recently,
crazy.
so even though we're mostly talking about this current stretch, it was already like pretty rocky before then, and the only teams that they beat is some teams that are just playing like ass. So I'm really interested to see if they can turn things around for the rest of the year. They might need Matthews to score 70 at this point. Like if he dips down to even a 60 goal pace, that might be enough for them to just not make the playoffs, which is really funny to me because obviously he's amazing and he can carry their team, but if he gets injured or if his pace just slows down a little bit, they might be screwed.
Even if they make it to the playoffs, like if the core four pull off their disappearing act again, like what else do you have?
Exactly.
It's going to be interesting to see how they trend because right now it's not going well for them.
Yeah, I'm super excited to watch the Leafs for the rest of the year, just to hate on them and cheer against them. And like, there wasn't any stipulation on this or anything, but now that I'm not employed by Leafs fans, I feel like I can just let loose and be like my ultimate hater self. Like
Oh my God.
I could have said anything that I wanted to at any point, but now I'm like, now I can just be a massive hater, and I won't have any SDPN like fans who are Leafs fans coming at me and being like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're a homer. I'm gonna just unabashedly be a homer against the Leafs at this point because I want to see them fail.
You had to fake it for so long that
Exactly.
now they get
I'd
the
have
real.
I would have to be a
version.
little respectful to the Leafs. Like I did one crossover show with the game over Toronto, and where of course we beat them. And it was just like being polite and being like, oh yeah, well the Leafs will turn it around. Don't worry, they're not that bad. But now I'm like, no, they suck, dude. I can be honest.
If you got that opportunity now, you would just be like, how does it feel?
Yeah, exactly.
How does it
Like,
feel to be a Leafs fan? Does it hurt?
I am not expecting the Leafs to do great for the rest of the year. I think they still could make the playoffs.
I think they probably will.
Yeah, because the thing is, I don't trust Detroit or Tampa either. Like, Detroit is playing with house money, and they didn't expect to be close to the playoffs at this point, so maybe they can pull it off, maybe they'll fall back a bit, and it's not a big deal for them. And I also do think that Tampa is pretty cooked. Vasilevsky is very hit and miss now, and they're just being carried. They're being carried by Nikita Kucherov, just like the Leafs are being carried by Matthews and Nylander, so the Tampa's not really that much better in terms of their depth. So so the Leafs could easily finish the season better than both of those teams and still make the playoffs, third in the Atlantic. But I hope they don't.
Just imagine, Maude, the Sens go on their Hamburglar 2.0 run.
Oh,
And
God.
they just get in on the last day, 2 points ahead of the Leafs in the final wildcard spot.
That's the dream right there.
It would never happen, but I'm speaking the delusion, just hopefully to increase the chances of it happening.
Yeah, it will be the soggy burger run this time with Matt Sogard.
There we go. There we go.
It'd be in when you get a bad burger from McDonald's, just a soggy ass beef patty. That's what it is. The soggy burger run.
I don't like saying it as much as hamburger,
Yeah.
but it'd have to be that.
It doesn't have the
feels
same
quite
ring
close.
to it, but I don't think there's anything better that works better.
No, you're probably right though. We'd have to call it that.
All right, well, I think that's where we're gonna leave it for today. That was fun. A lot of great topics today.
Yeah, more news. It'll always be coming. If you'd like to check out more Extra Attackers, we of course do a podcast about every twice a week on most of the places where you can get podcasts, including Spotify, YouTube. If you want to get us directly, there's at Extra Attackers on Twitter. Also, there's Maude's Show and Saint of Stutzla. If you want to contact me, Saint of Stutzla, or Maude's Show on Twitter for any reason. Those are our handles. Let us know what you want to see more in the show. What do you want to see less? And I guess we'll talk to you guys next time.
Yep, all those handles are in the description, of course. On YouTube and Spotify. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.